My name is Angie, and this is the story I wasn't supposed to find.
And I'm our sister, Cindy. We started this podcast with one name, Stella Smith, our great-grandmother, a woman who gave up 2 daughters, disappeared from history, and left behind almost nothing.
No photos, no grave, no explanation, just a blank space where a person should have been.
Until a DNA test changed everything. Turns out, Stella Smith wasn't even her real name.
Her name was Estrella Suarez. She came to America from Spain as a child. She married twice, left 2 families, and somehow managed to vanish not once, but twice from history.
In season 1, we found Estrella's beginnings in America. We found family we didn't know existed. We sat across a table from cousins who'd been looking for the same woman we had from the other direction. And we thought we were closing a chapter.
We were wrong.
Because season 2 is where things get even more complicated and even more personal. New relatives surface, new documents turn up, and some of the answers we finally found led to questions we'd never thought to ask.
This is Buried Threads, a podcast about family secrets, silence, reinvention, and what happens when the past refuses to stay buried.
We have been looking for our great-grandmother, Estrella Suarez Valdez Della Smith, the board, woman of many names. She disappeared from her life more than once and from history. And we talked about how we were able to meet one DNA match, Paul. Well, actually multiple, but we connected through Paul, our mom's first cousin. And we've been wanting to hear from another close DNA match, Ryan. And we put the plea out last season. We've been asking to be in touch with Ryan Walters, been emailing him, all those things. Finally heard from him, our mom's first cousin DNA match. That got a little wonky with the DNA, and we'll talk about that later, that anomaly. But in the end, Ryan's mom has 20+% Spanish ancestry. And so after looking at history and sorting all that out, we know we're connected through his mom. So Angie, lay out some of the conversation that you had with Ryan and Terry in the very beginning when you were just trying to figure out, we know we're connected. What's the connection?
It's 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm laying in my bed texting him, as I open this email and we see all this information back and forth, and I just can't wrap my mind around it. But I'm also super excited. And one thing that kept sticking in my craw, something that I couldn't quite put together with this, is he's 30 years old. How can he be a first cousin with my mother? This didn't make sense, but the DNA said that he was. And so we did figure that out later, but that was part of what kept saying to me, something's not right here. But yet it is very right. And so we're having conversation, he's sharing information. He already had a pretty well-developed tree. So he quickly gave me access to that tree. And so I'm opening it on my end and he's looking at his end, and we're trying to put all the pieces together. And to be honest, I was going at it a little bit fast because I was so excited about this. And, who is this? And it wasn't until we had searched for quite a while in there. We're trying to make these people fit that they weren't even the right people. When I realized, wait a minute, this is the paternal side. There's a whole other maternal side I'm not looking at. And so I stopped, and I said this in the last episode. I stopped to him and said, okay, wait a minute. Who has the Spanish ancestry? And that's when he said, oh, both of my parents have tested. Let me look really quick, and was able to pull it up. And when he came back to that conversation, there was just kind of this wonderment. And he said, and my mom thinks that we're talking about her grandmother, Wilma. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, it's so crazy. So what made her think of her grandmother? I mean, obviously, maybe this isn't obvious to our listeners, but it's obvious to us. It's not like she was aware of any of this. So what made Terry think, oh, this might be my grandmother that we're connected through?
We'll get into more of this later, but just on the surface, the initial things, it was just her grandmother had a lot of secrets, and there were a lot of questions about her life. So I think when she heard this, believe me, it was not an easy jump for her. It's been a lot of processing for her to understand this person in a different way. But at the same time, there was this sense of it could be. It wasn't like there's no possible way. It was, oh yeah, there's a few little things that just could make this fit. And so we just spent some time. So initially I'm texting Ryan, who's texting Terry, who's texting Ryan, who's texting me. And so Ryan was this go between in between. And finally, Terry and I just exchanged information, and we were able to talk directly and, able to ask more questions in that way. And, I'm asking questions. She's asking questions. I know some of the answers to the things that she's asking, but I don't know all of them. She knows some of the things I'm asking, but not all of them. And so we're just putting it together. Yeah. I'm kind of both eating the sandwich from opposite sides, from opposite ends, so to speak.
Yes.
But and each of us processing in different ways. I'm having this bit of excitement because this is a huge breakthrough. I mean, this is a huge, huge breakthrough because Wilma, they have her documented. Well, we'll get into details about this, but from 1937 until her death. It took it forever to connect with Ryan, but then in an instant, we've now connected her timeline all the way into her death. We know where she's buried. I can read her obituary. We can see all those things. But at the same time, Terry's processing this now. She has to re-understand everything she thought she knew about her grandmother in a different way. And so we're both having lots of emotions. We're both having lots of questions. We're both being inquisitive. But the best thing is we were both talking to each other. Neither one of us were wanting to shut the conversation down. And so that really was able to keep things going and to get answers for both of us. Here's the other piece, the other big piece. I didn't answer your question fully. There were some questions in regard to Wilma's life, some secrets that had been told, and I'll tell you what they are in just one second. But those had left their family looking for answers, specifically her son, who's Edward, and Edward is Terry's father. Okay. So there were some questions about that. So he was actually a police officer. Ironically, he was a police officer by trade. I believe it was a county
We've run
sheriff.
into that a few times, haven't we?
Her life was surrounded by law enforcement while she was living outside of that law. It's just very interesting.
Yes.
But anyways, so because of his training, whatever, he had questions. He spent a lot of his time trying to get answers to those questions. Until the very end of his life, he'd been searching. And the end of his life was only 6 weeks before we made this DNA match. So had we been able to make this connection just a little bit sooner, we might have actually had the opportunity to meet him face to face, which would have been amazing, but also hard. I think that one of the things we've talked before about this, but all of us who are searching now, we're a generation or two below. And so while we have, emotions and feelings, it's not the same as those who are like more directly connected. And so it would have been amazing to be able to meet him and to know him and to, understand that. But it also would have been hard for him, I think, to process too. So it's kind of a give and take. But that's one of the reasons why it was able to make sense to her, because she knew that he had been searching for answers, that there were some things that did not line up in her story. And, she refused to ever tell him these things, and he spent a lot of time looking for it.
Yeah, it sounds like from what we've heard, there were like these little things that just piqued his interest in. Probably he had instincts, right, on one hand, and then Edward as a county sheriff would have also had training. So I would imagine, you put instinct and training together, you can, when you're being lied to, even if you don't know what the truth is, or when you're not getting the whole truth. And then I know Terry said that there were times her dad asked questions and his mom just flat out wouldn't give him an answer. That would make me very curious.
Well, this one, it's a pretty big one. Okay. So, and I don't know how old or when he learned this information, but on his birth certificate, on every birth certificate, it always asked, how many children have you had living? How many children deceased, whatever?
How many live births?
How many live births, right?
One, yeah.
And it said on his, now, let me back up. She had 2 children in this life, in this
yes.
life.
Yes.
A girl and a boy.
We'll get to those details, but yeah.
He was the youngest.
Yeah.
But on the birth certificate, it said that he was the 7th child. Now, that's a big bombshell for a lot of reasons, okay? But you can imagine if, as far as he knows, he's child number 2, and he sees his birth certificate and it's 7, there would be lots of questions, right? Lots of questions.
It would be, I would have lots of questions.
And these are questions that she wouldn't answer. And we'll get into later about what that all looked like and what that led to, because it did lead to some things. But that was one of the big things that, again, you can't easily dismiss that. You can't easily just be like, oh, well, whatever. No, this is actually a pretty significant detail. There are some other significant ones, but that's actually what drove his search to know more and to feel like he didn't have the full answer. That and the fact that she wouldn't give a straight answer then when he asked about it, it brought a lifetime of questions.
Yeah. We've talked about how, it's emotional for us. We know that it's emotional for us to make these connections, even for our parents, right? For those who are first cousins. But thinking about the previous generation, I'm kind of glad that our grandmother did not know all of this. I think it would have been very hurtful for her. It would have been a very different experience for her. Mm-hmm. So I am sad that Edward never got those answers. I don't know how he would have processed it, but it was such a short timeline. It was just right in the midst of all the things that we were doing. I mean, he just weeks we missed.
Yes.
But I also, at the same time, wish we could have had conversation with him, because just like we're discovering, as we begin to look at things differently, we get some context, we get fact, we get a piece of information and suddenly we're going back and looking at documents and family stories passed down and what we thought we knew with new eyes, right?
Yeah.
Because we have new information. There's probably so many things that for him would be like click, click, click. All these things suddenly
It was his
make
mother,
sense,
and
this thing
he would have known her for his whole life. There would have been lots of things that would have come out of
would have
that.
been lots of things. Yeah, exactly. So we'll get into some of the things that we know in a little more detail. Some of the clues that she
Well,
dropped
hold
in
on
her
for just a
life.
minute. We're going to get into it in a minute, but here's the big thing. We found her, right? Like, that was the thing. I'd be going through this, and all of a sudden I would just stop and be like, wait a minute, I found her. We found her.
Right.
We found Stella.
Right.
That's just mind blowing.
And at the same time, thinking about Terry, she knew there were questions. She was unsure about some things about her grandmother. And when we presented her with a fact, we're connected by DNA, and this is how we know what that means. And you can talk about that in just a second, just so our listeners are reminded like how the DNA mapped that out. Once we present that fact, then all of a sudden she sort of instinctually knew that it was her grandmother just because of all the question marks and all the things. She just, it's sort of a gut feeling like this is
never
her.
denied it.
But
she never denied it. Yeah.
Right. I did not have that gut feeling yet. I mean, we have proof, we have DNA, we have, we're going to go through some of that. But for me, I was like, oh, but are we sure? Because there's been so many times we thought we might have it or, you know, whatever, or so many times we hoped and then it wasn't fruitful. So I didn't have that gut feeling. I was like, oh, I need a little more proof. But we got
the proof coming. We got the proof coming.
Yeah. And it was it was unbelievable. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
So talk about the DNA. Just, you don't have to run through all the journey, but just how we know when you put how everybody's connected through DNA and who Wilma on Terry's tree is, how do we know that she's the connection?
Sure. So first of all, first cousin matches are fairly close, right? Like if it's a much more distant match, you know, there's a lot of inconsistencies or errors. Once you're into that first cousin range, it's much closer. So when I already knew that we were first cousin match with Paul, we already lined all those pieces up. I used a tool in Ancestry to see what DNA matches.
Can I say something?
Yes.
You know why we know that first cousin match? We know it because Paul and Mom took a DNA test. That's why we know it.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So then we're looking at, okay, so here we have Paul's DNA. We have my mom's DNA. What DNA matches do the two of them have in common? Because anybody that the two of them have in common, they're going to be in this cluster. That means they're both going to be related to Estella, right? Estrella.
Yeah.
So we're looking. And in that list, there's only about 30. It's not even a big list. And of those 30, most of them are way out in the distance, but there's a handful that are close in. And again, the bigger those numbers, those are the ones to pay attention to. And all of a sudden, here's this Ryan Walter. And he actually has more DNA in common with my mom than with Paul. Though they're comparable. It's just slightly more, but still significant. And
same level of relationship. Yeah.
And he has the Spanish ethnicity and, you know, he's in that tight circle. So we know that he's part of this. So then we did this whole mapping thing. And in the very short version of this, if Ryan descended from Mary Rose. So we know Mary Rose is Estella's first child. If he had come through that line somehow, however that scenario might look, then his DNA would have been much closer to Paul's than to my mom's. But it wasn't.
Yeah.
If he was related out of either Florence or Marie Christine, the two children that she had with Christopher DeBoard, the same, you know, it was some secret child or something unknown, whatever. If that was the case, then he would show up closer to Mom than he would to Paul. He did not. He was equal distance to all. So we knew that he had to have come from Estrella, but it had to be from a different child. So that's how we knew he was important. He was critical. The part that didn't make sense is, according to his ancestry biography, before I talked to him, he was 30 years old. And I'm like, this makes no sense. But DNA does not lie. So we had to figure this out.
But then also having Terry's DNA makes the difference, right?
Right. So here's the other thing. I didn't have Terry's DNA, so to speak. She wasn't showing up on Ancestry because she did her DNA test through 23andMe. So she wasn't showing up when we looked at those comparative matches. I mean, she's giving me the information now, but she wasn't showing up in that list because those don't auto-populate, you know, to each other. So actually the fact that, and his dad had also taken DNA, which we would never show up in that one, but I don't know. But I don't think it was Ancestry. I don't know where it was. But the point is, the fact that Ryan had his DNA in Ancestry is what brought those pieces together, because now they were in the same database and we could compare them together and we could see. And that's what it takes, right? It doesn't have to be the exact person. It can be anyone in that line. because DNA tells a story and it points it. And that's how we got connected to Ryan.
Yeah.
That's how we knew he was important and why I kept writing him so many times, asking him to please, open his email and have this conversation with me. And he did. And here we are.
So as we were looking into, Terry said, I'm pretty sure this is my grandmother, her dad, Edward's mother. And so I just want to talk a little bit about what the facts that we were able to find about Terry's grandmother, Edward's mother, and her name is Wilma. So let's talk about some of the things that we, can document or have some sort of proof. If we didn't
not
anything
just
else.
Something that was told as a story, but something that we can prove on a research somewhere.
Yeah. So first of all, we know that she was married to William Edward Nelson in May of 1937, kind of where her documented history really begins. But we know that she was married under that identity. Yes, as Wilma.
Yes.
You already mentioned she had 2 children with William. First is Frances, or they called her Franny Nelson Ferguson. She was born January 13th of 1939. I know people want to know those dates. So she was born 1939. And she married Richard Ferguson August 19th, 1963. And even when they were married, it's kind of it's another sweet, sad story. Even when they got married, they knew that she had ovarian cancer. She had been sick for quite a time. But they got married in August of 1963, and she passed away in November of 1963. So they were only married for a few short months, and they did not have any children. She was 24 years old when she passed. It is sad. And then their second child together, Wilma and Williams. I'm sorry, their names are so close I might mix them up, but William and Wilma together had Edward F. Nelson. He was born August 19th, 1944. He was a Marine, and he also spent time as a county sheriff, and he passed in December of 2025. You want to talk a little bit about their work, what they did for a living?
Yep. So William was a janitor at a public school, and Stella was a cook she was a cook at a drugstore. We saw that on I want to say it was the 1940 census that was listed as her occupation. Though interestingly, when I talked about that with Terry, she didn't know that because in the time that she knew her, it was in the later years, and she was a cook at the same school where William had worked. In fact, they said that after he passed away, she began to do both the janitorial and the cooking at the same school, taking over. And they lived literally right across the street from the school.
They shared a newspaper clipping of the children at the school planting a dogwood tree in memory of William after he passed. And Wilma's in the picture. So we have a picture of her. She's kind of looking on as the children are doing this nice memorial to William. So we know that they were beloved there at that school. And by the way, we talked about this before when we met with Paul and his family, and they had talked about Mary Rose, and Mary Rose was a cook. Yes. And we thought it was such a cool thing because our grandmother also worked for a time as a cook. And I know some of that's era or whatever, but then here we find out Wilma worked as a cook. And so that's just kind of a cool little thread that runs through, right?
All the way through. Yep. Yeah. I was going to just say, we didn't have any early pictures of Stella. That was one of the whole things. We wish we could, but we have lots of photos of her now from this era, right? Because the family has those things to share. And so that's a pretty cool thing. And we know what she looked like.
Yeah, that's right. It's special. William passed, I don't know the exact date, but I'm pretty sure it's in 1966. Yeah. And Wilma stayed there where they lived for a little while. And then she moved closer to Edward so she could be close to his family. And then we know that she passed away in 1981. So that's what we know about Wilma. But let's talk about what she told her family about her history, because this history with William really begins when they got married in May of 1937. So obviously we're coming into part of the time when she had to have official documentation. She had to have paperwork. She had to have IDs and all Social Security. So it's not surprising she had to create her history. So let's talk about some of the things that she told her family about where she came from.
Yeah. So we'll analyze what some of these things mean later because there's some really interesting things in there. I'm just going to give right now the facts. Okay. So
yes, absolutely.
She told her family that she was born July 26, 1900. So 5 years earlier than she actually was in Oklahoma.
Right.
And that she was born to John Huffman, her father, and Rosemarie Leonetti, her mother. As far as what she had told her family about the life before being married to William Nelson, just from family, that she was married, that she had been previously married to someone named Walter. We'll talk more about Walter later, but we could find no record of anything, and they had no record of anything. But Walter was an important, person in her life that she talked about frequently as far as life before. Said that her family came from Italy, and I guess that's where the name Leonetti comes from. And that's pretty much what they knew about her. They really didn't know much about her history. I think that was part of the mystery and part of what didn't make sense. But that was pretty much what they knew.
What we know to be true, just to recap for some of our listeners, if you're following, you remember that Estrella was reported as being 15 years old on the 1920 census in Taylor Springs. Yes, we put a question mark by anything that Estrella reports herself. And we know that census, is also, it's a good marker, but you have to be careful with it. In general, we know that Rosa or Manuel would have given this information as she was a child. And so it's more like, and you mentioned this, you would know the difference between a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old. That's right. The difference.
If you're 30, you could maybe pull off and say you're 35 and nobody would look twice. But when you're 15, you can't say you're 10 or can't say you're 20, right? Like it's going to be more obvious.
Right.
So the fact that the record is younger and it wasn't by Estrella's record keeping that this age came from, we believe that to be as close to true as we can get.
Yeah. And the age that shows up on Mary Rose's birth certificate aligns with that birth year. It matches. So at least in that life, in that era of her life, she was claiming that time frame. So we guess that that's probably correct. We also know on that same census, it's reported that she is from Spain, that's her birthplace.
That's what our DNA says.
Right. And that's what the DNA says. So that's also important. By the way, no real amount of Italian in there.
Yeah. The first thing that popped in my head when she first told me that was, well, what I do know is I've never seen her ship manifest when she came over, but all the rest of the family from Spain and all the records I've seen, almost every one of them left from a port in Italy. Like they would go from Spain to this port in Italy and then the port in Italy to New York. So even though we don't have a document, if the document did exist, it would say Italy was her port of departure because that's where they came from. So I don't know if she was just making up for the whatever, but there was a semblance of truth, which seems to be her MO, right? All throughout life, there are pieces of truth, but not 100% truth in a lot of things.
It's true. And I really want to give the benefit of the doubt wherever I can as a matter of grace, right? Don't make assumptions. But she would have known she was Spanish. I mean,
she could speak Spanish.
She grew up in a Spanish community. I mean, grew up to adult years, right? Pretty much until she married Christopher in a Spanish community. The people who raised her spoke Spanish. Her Rosa only spoke Spanish. She
her
never
husband,
learned
Emil,
English.
Only spoke Spanish.
Emilio, that's why he was called okay because he couldn't speak very much English. So, and so that, I mean, that takes her like pretty much to 18, 19 years old. So she knows she's Spanish. It's not like, I came over when I was 8 years old and I've just sort of, forgotten these memories of Spain. And no, that's not reality. So whatever she told, she knew the truth.
Exactly.
But you're right. Could be like, oh, well, technically I came from Italy. Well, the family was able to share a lot of things. We've talked about this in the previous episodes, but we're piecing together little bits of information over a couple decades. And not to mention the amount of time that our grandmother searched, right? And we can put her searching, according to our grandfather, all the way back to the 50s, but according to documentation, for sure back to the 80s. So, you start putting all these pieces together bit by bit and you make a little headway here or there. And then all of a sudden, the dam breaks and you get this onslaught. It happened with Paul and his family, and it's happening now.
Yeah.
So there's a lot. But what some of the things that they were able to show us right away, pictures of their gravestone. William and Wilma share a headstone. And so we were able to see that. Right away, we were able to see Francis's headstone. We have a death certificate for Estrella, or Wilma. And one funny thing, Angie, we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, but her name shows up, her middle name shows up as Estelle. On her death certificate, it shows up as Estella. So we can sort some of that out later, but it's just an interesting thing.
And also, let's just not slide by the irony that even though she made this new identity, that the name Stella was still part of it, right? She took part of her life in.
Yeah. Now we know she didn't go by Stella because the family has told us that.
Yeah.
But yes, it's still, there's a little clue in there. Whether it's Estelle or Estella or Estrella or Stella, whatever, it's all in the same family. I mean, she didn't say Rebecca,
Right.
It was still a piece of her there.
Yes. Well, and one of the things that Terry said is sometimes when they would fight or they bicker, that her husband would call her Stella, but like normally it was Wilma. But in those like heated moments, whatever, he might call her Stella.
Which that makes me question: did he know?
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about that. There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Somebody knew.
Yeah, exactly. We have Ed's birth certificate. We have William's death certificate. And then, of course, we have their daughter, Frances's obituary. So at the end, I told you, I was more out of, just our experience in the past. I just was hesitant to say, this is her. We found our great grandmother. We found Estrella. We found Stella. I just needed more and more reassurance. Let's just cap this off by saying, like, how we know. And the first thing that I'll bring up is a timeline. I think you said this earlier. This is the first time that the timeline actually works pretty tightly and pretty perfectly, because the last record we have of Stella DeBoard is when she's a live-in domestic worker at Etta Montgomery's residence. And she shows up several years in a row on the city directory. And the last time that we have her listed at that residence, living there, working there, is 1937. Now, you also discovered what being on a 1937 directory actually means.
Yeah, I just wondered about that once I realized how tight these dates were. I wanted to understand. I knew what a city directory was, but I wanted to understand how they got the information and what the timeline for that looked like. And so I just did a little bit of research. And basically, they said that city directories were done much like a census, where somebody would go door to door to gather the information, but they typically would do that in the fall and then publish it in the beginning of the year. So basically, if someone shows up in a 1937 city directory, that means during a late 1936 canvass, they would have been there. So it doesn't mean that we don't know exactly when she left, but it just made that tight window make a little bit more sense. It also helped us to make sense of back in 1930 when both Stella and Christopher were showing up with overlapping records, showing up in the city directory and a census. That could they could all be true. They could have all been accurate at that time. We know things were very fluid then because the year was 19 whatever. The information would have been gathered the fall before. So anyways, interesting little tidbit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it's an important thing to know because we know that's not cold hard fact, but when we're laying out the dates, interesting to know that it really only places her at Etta Montgomery's as late as fall or end of year 1936, and not really anytime in 1937. It doesn't mean she wasn't there in 1937. It just means the city directory doesn't verify that for us specifically. So obviously the timeline there does work because we can put her at Etta's, and she wouldn't have been married while she was at Etta's. She was living at Etta's. She wouldn't have been married. So we know that she was there. Actually, you talked about her being discharged from the hospital with Marie Christine to Etta's address.
Yeah, 1928.
So from 1928, pretty consistently, although we can't account for every single year, but from 1928 to end of 1936, we can place her at Etta's.
Yes.
So then the next date that comes into play that we can document is her marriage to William in May of 1937. I mean, let's say that's a 6 month timeline. That's a pretty tight timeline.
Yes. First time we've ever had, there's no gaps, right? That we can be with relative assurance that those things connect together. So pretty it was pretty exciting actually.
Yeah. And then of course the DNA. DNA doesn't lie. So we knew that, but we know that we're connected through DNA, the Spanish ancestry. We know that Terry and Paul and our mom are, well, Yeah,
We're all
when we
first
don't have
cousins. We're all
DNA
first
from
cousins.
Florence. Yeah, they're all the
Yeah.
same generation,
Yeah.
all first cousins. And so that works as well. But there was a moment, even without the gut feeling,
Yeah.
there was a moment when we're getting all this information, we're taking it all in. There was a piece of information when we sort of knew, like the neon sign that we were
Yes.
looking for. That
Bombshell
this,
for us, bombshell for Terry, bombshell for all of us.
yeah. So as they're sending us information, one of the things that they sent was an obituary for Frances, for Franny. And she's the one who died when she was 24. And I mean, that's a nice thing. And we knew that's not who we're looking at. But when we read the obituary, I about had a heart attack because it's not a long obituary, but at the end, it listed surviving siblings. And first of all, there's a half sibling from William on that list. And we verified that with Terry. That's who that person was. It, of course, lists her brother, Edward, and then there's another sister. And that name that we saw on that obituary listed as a surviving sister is Mrs. Florence Knoll. Uh,
Wild. Wild. How did that get
I
there?
uh, so for those who have been following the story, when Estrella left Emilio and Mary Rose, she then married Christopher DeBoard. Christopher and Stella had 2 children together, Florence DeBoard and Marie Christine DeBoard, who is our grandmother. Florence later got married to Theodore Knoll.
Right.
It also in the obituary references Mrs. Florence Knoll living in Springfield.
Yes.
I have so many questions.
Right. She knew the married name. That's the first
She
thing,
knew the
right?
married
She knew the
name.
married name. That
Yeah,
becomes a really big thing later. We're going to get to that later. But that means she knew the married name. She's done some whatever. And then the second thing is, how did that get there? Because think about this. Who writes obituaries, right? Literally,
right.
you can write whatever you want. I mean, whoever's writing the obituary can write whatever they want. It's not like it has to be fact checked. But somebody, that's the point. Nobody's producing documentation. No outside source was researching this. Somebody from family. Now, we know it wasn't Edward that wrote the obituary because he was serving the military. He was out of the country at the time
Yeah,
that she died. He didn't write it. So
yes,
that means it only could be her husband or Wilma herself. So either Wilma let this secret out, which I like to use the phrase that she was keeping secrets and dropping bombs. This is a really big bomb because she's now brought this
yes,
information from her other life into here. How did that randomly show up in there? Right? Like it's just so wild. Or it means that somebody else in that household knew,
yeah.
presumably Edward, and that he shared that information.
Not Edward. His name is Richard.
I'm sorry. I'm
Sorry.
sorry.
I know.
I'm
Names.
sorry. William. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. No, 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 no. So, yeah. So William's the father. Yes.
Yes.
And Richard is her husband. But again, they were married such a short time. I'm sure that he would have relied on whatever her parents told
Yes.
him for if he did the obituary. Terry really thinks that Wilma probably did the obituary. And the thing about that, we asked her, did you ever wonder who that is? Like before we told her who it was, we said, do you know who this is? And she didn't.
No.
And she said, actually, I've never even looked at this obituary. Why would I? When you
Right.
grow up knowing that your aunt died young and you might not have a thought that I'm going to go look at the obituary. And it's a lot like what we do now when all of a sudden we have a fact, a context, and we go back and look at other things and we see things that never occurred to us before. The Galesburg district
Yeah.
supervisor, the dates of the adoption versus the termination of parental rights, all these things that are right there. We've had them for decades, but you just you just look at them with different eyes once you have a piece of information that gives you different context. She was pretty floored too when we told her who
Yes.
that was.
Right. So, but here's the important piece of this that it just can't be understated. However this information got there, we've now crossed her 2 identities into one.
Yes.
Somebody from her old life
Yeah.
is showing up in the obituary of somebody from her current life. If you had any doubts, if you had any wondering,
Yeah.
it's wild.
So where that leaves us is we found her.
Mind blowing.
Yeah.
25 years of,
Yeah.
are we ever going to find her? And
Right.
we didn't just find her again. all the way to her resting place.
Yeah.
We know where she was buried.
Yeah.
We know what her life looked like, pretty well documented from 37 all the way till 80, whatever, when she died.
Yeah. And while there's some questions about, the interim years, largely we know where she was and what she was doing, right?
Right.
In the time
Right.
in the roughly 10 years or so between,
Yeah.
a little less than 10 years when she was at Edda's. And really we can now trace this woman with multiple identities, multiple families, all of this back to about 8 years old. Now we don't know much about her life prior to being 8 years old, but from 8 until her death in 1981, I feel like that's a huge accomplishment. It's unbelievable. I don't think I really thought we were ever going to find those answers, and certainly not such a wealth of information. I thought we were going to one day just find a obituary somewhere or a headstone somewhere, or DNA, but we are now connected with more family, more people, and most importantly, people who knew her. Like,
Right.
not knew about her, not knew facts about her, not knew. And just like with Paul, like, to know somebody, he could tell us about his mom and Manuel and Rosa from people who knew them. Well, same thing now. Somebody knows great grandma, knows her as a person. And while there's some unraveling there for her of the person she thought she knew,
Yeah.
for us, it's building.
Yeah.
And it's impactful and it's unbelievable. Here's the other thing. Once again, if we thought this was going to bring closure, we were very, very wrong.
More questions. We have answers and we have a lot more questions.
Yeah, we have a lot more questions. Was there actually a husband named Walter before William, like between Christopher or even just a relationship? We're not going to go deep dive into this right now, but you mentioned 7 live births. And if anybody knows the story and does the math, we don't know about 7 children. So
We know 6. We know 6.
we know 6. So that's a question mark as well. Again, were there legal issues? We know there were legal issues. Like, she wasn't even technically legally married to Christopher. It's certainly not to William, but we go back to the probation thing. Were there other legal issues in there? I would love to know what Ed found when he was doing his search.
Mm-hmm.
And then Florence. How did she know about Florence? Did they have connection? Was she somehow mapping her, tracing her, keeping an eye on her? Was she in touch with somebody who gave her information? So we're left with a lot more questions.
Yeah.
We were recently able to meet Terry in person a few weeks ago
Yes.
with our mom and with Paul.
Yes.
And we have a lot to tell our listeners about that. But we're going to do it in the next episode. And I know you're probably wanting to throw a shoe at me right now or something, but it's so much. We could never do it all in one shot. But also, Terry is going to join us for that conversation.
Yes. It's going to be good.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about what's it like to have someone call and reveal that your grandmother had a whole other life that you didn't know about. Actually, 2. What's it like to suddenly find out you have cousins and second cousins and new family members, and to be getting emails from them and texts from them and, being asked to come on a podcast with them? Like, what is that like from her perspective?
Well, also know that she's an only child, and she didn't really have any cousins because her aunt died young, and so now she has a lot. and we talk all the time.
Yeah.
So we'll ask her what that's like.
Yeah, I'm sure it's also surreal for different reasons, surreal from her perspective as well. So we really hope that you join us to hear from Terry. If you haven't been following, we highly recommend that you go listen to season 1 and the first couple episodes of this season. There's so much information about this story. It'll put everything in perspective. And I would guess that your mind is going to be blown in the same way that ours has been over and over and over again. Yeah. And spoiler, we are not done. There is more crazy truths that just have shook us, right? Like,
Crazy truths and
So.
amazing things. You said this earlier, but it's so true. Right now, information is coming at us so fast. And that first season was basically 25 years of research that we tried to organize and tell in layers to bring everybody up to speed with all the things. Now things are just season 2. We're just going to be going as we go. And there's so many things coming at us, and it's exciting. And it's a lot. So join with us. It's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, it's incredible and crazy. And I'm really excited for everybody to hear Terry's story.
And here, the bottom line is we found her. We found Stella.
We found her.
Estrella. We know her resting place.
Estrella, yeah. Suarez, Valdez, Stella, Smith, DeBoer, Wilma, Nelson.
Yes. Nelson.
Put that on a headstone.
and then period. There's no more. Period.
Right. Period. That's it. Done. Thanks for listening. If you're walking your own search through DNA, silence, or a name you can't quite place, you're not alone.
If you want to go deeper on this story, you can find us on Substack at buriedthreads.substack.com. That's where we release every episode, along with documents, photos, and the kind of details that don't always make it into the audio.
You can also find and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And if you haven't yet, subscribing or leaving a review makes a real difference in helping other people find us.
For more photos, recap videos, polls, and the occasionally chaotic behind-the-scenes moments, find us on Facebook and Instagram. We're at Buried Threads.
And if something we've shared has stirred something in your own family story, we really do want to hear it. Reach out. You might be surprised where a single thread leads.
Until next time, keep pulling the thread.
Just knowing she existed. She was real. She had a name.